Today's message is called Praokasaob, and it's based on verses 31 through 35 from the 13th chapter of John's Gospel. A friend of mine was telling me how several years ago his church bought an industrial-grade gas range with a double oven to replace the old oven in the church kitchen. It was so big and heavy that the day they took delivery of it, it took several husky workers just to unload it and move it into the kitchen and put it in place and get it working. Everything went like clockwork, and the pastor knew everyone would be delighted to get this new range. But there was just one thing that annoyed him. The range had been packed in a huge box that when the workers left, they simply left behind. Not only did they leave the box behind, but they left it right next to the door where people would be entering the church the following Sunday. People would literally have to step around it, even over it, to get inside the church. At first, the pastor was upset, even angry about the carelessness of these workers, but then he got an idea. Maybe he could use the box right where it was. He decided he would do a little experiment. That Sunday, he found some old ratty clothes and put them on. He pulled a ragged, oversized stocking cap over his head. He put on a pair of old boots. He wrapped himself in one of his dog's tattered blankets, and he laid down in the box. He was curious to see what people might do as they came to church and discovered this homeless person sleeping in the church's doorway. Sure enough, people became very uneasy as they walked by the box, peeked into it, and saw the homeless man sleeping under the blanket. Nearly every one of them went into the church and immediately started asking, "Where's the pastor? Where's the pastor? Surely he'll do something about this problem." When they couldn't find the pastor, they looked for the next best option. The council president. But the council president didn't want anything to do with it either. "It's not my job," he told anyone who asked. "Go tell the Christian ed director." Well, she was just as consistent and insistent when people came to her. "Go tell the social ministry chairperson. That's her thing." Each person kept passing the problem to the next, as not one single person wanted to deal with the smelly man sleeping in the box. Soon it was time for the worship service to begin. Suddenly the problem no longer was the man in the box, but rather was, "Where's the pastor?" 5 minutes past starting time, there was still no pastor to be found. 10 minutes, no pastor. The church council president and the woman who was head of the worship committee were being pushed to take action until they couldn't wait any longer. Time for a decision. Shall we cancel worship and tell everyone to go home, or shall we piece something together and have a quick service and then send people on their way? They were just about to settle on something when suddenly this sleeping homeless man in the box came walking up the center aisle of the very full church. At first he shuffled slowly, hunched over, the blanket tightly wrapped around him. Then he started to straighten up, walk a little more quickly and steadily, and then he started peeling off layers. First, the blanket, which he dropped in the middle of the aisle. Then the oversized coat. When he finally took off the floppy stocking hat, that's when people realized who it was, and that's also when they realized they had been had. They also realized in that instant that they had learned something about themselves. They had made assumptions. Their first instinct was to be afraid of the man in the box, afraid of having to deal with him, unsure of what to do with him, nervous about having their comfortable Sunday routine disrupted. Each one eager to pass the problem on to the next person. As it turns out, they hardly needed a sermon that day, but the pastor gave one anyway. And in a very compassionate way, he talked about what it means and what it looks like to be a church that truly welcomes and accepts all people as beloved children of God. How assumptions can be hurtful, and to this day I'm told that people in that church still talk about the day the homeless man walked right up the center aisle and forced them to take a good hard look at themselves and their attitudes about those who aren't like them. Now, you don't need to worry. I'm not courageous or bold enough to do something like that here to you. But if I did, I think I know you well enough by now to imagine there would be more than a few people here whose response would be different, more welcoming and compassionate. Even so, I wonder if there isn't at least a tiny part of each of us that would experience some of the same feelings and emotions the members of my friend's church felt that day. Reticence, anxiety, reluctance, discomfort, wanting, hoping, and expecting that someone else would take care of it. In this morning's gospel lesson, Jesus speaks words that we all need to hear. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, he said. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. Now, we could spend a lot of time today discussing the Greek language of John's Gospel, going through each of the 4 Greek words for love, telling you why the word Jesus used was different from all the rest, but I rather suspect you've heard that sermon before. Suffice it to say, when Jesus talked about loving, he wasn't talking about loving those who are easy to love. What Jesus was talking about was loving those who are difficult to love. Of all the things the Bible asks us to do, this may be the most difficult: to love the stranger, the unlovable person, those who are sleeping in boxes this very day. And yet this is the kind of love that honors and pleases God most. There's a way of living that kind of love, this new commandment of Jesus. It's called Praokasaob. Now, before I tell you what that means, I'd like you to look at something else Jesus said in today's gospel. He said, now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. The word glory is an interesting word. It's a church word that can be confusing and hard to understand. We hear it in our Lutheran liturgies, in the Christian songs we listen to, and on the church channel on TV. We assume we know the meaning of the word glory because we've all had experiences of things we would describe as glorious. Watching an amazing sunrise or sunset against the face of the mountains. Seeing an incredible rainbow against the black clouds of a storm that just passed. Jesus himself talked about that kind of glory when he referred to King Solomon in all of his glory, which of course conjures up images of riches and kingly robes and shiny gold crowns and majestic thrones and temples and fortresses and all kinds of other things that we associate with kings. But in today's gospel, Jesus uses the word glory in a different way. Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him, Jesus says. Do you know when he said that? It was right after he sent Judas away from the Last Supper so Judas could begin the process of betraying him. It was when the chain of events was set in motion that would eventually lead to Jesus' death on a cross. That's when he said he had been glorified. In other words, for Jesus, the word glory didn't mean accumulating wealth and power and witnessing something incredibly beautiful. For Jesus, glory meant giving himself fully for the sake of others. The first chapter of the New Testament book of Ephesians says something very interesting. It says, the very purpose for which we have been made is to give glory to God. Could that mean the same type of glory Jesus was talking about? The glory that comes not when we gain something, but when we lose something. When we give ourselves away, or at least a part of ourselves, to make someone else's life better. A kindergarten teacher was helping one of her students put his boots on. The teacher pulled and pushed and pulled and pushed, but the boots just did not want to go on. Finally, after a lot of hard work, she got the boots on the kid's feet, but she was exhausted doing it. Just as she was about to take him out to his bus, the little boy announced, "Teacher, they're on the wrong feet." And sure enough, they were. The teacher sighed and she started tugging at the boots again, and with great difficulty finally got the boots off. She struggled to get them back on, this time the right way, success, until the little boy said, "Teacher, these aren't my boots." The teacher wanted to scream, but she didn't. She bit her tongue as she struggled to help the boy pull the boots off once again. She started looking for the boots that actually belonged to the boy, just as he held up the very boots that had just come off his feet. And he said, "Actually, teacher, these are my brother's boots. My mom made me wear them today. I'm supposed to wear them home again, too." By now, the teacher didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She only knew she had to get those same boots on that same boy for the third time. Somehow she mustered up the grace to wrestle the boots on his feet, As she was finally about to take him out to the bus, she said, "Now, where are your mittens?" He answered, "I stuffed them in the toes of my boots." Some days are like that, aren't they? Exasperating. You try and try, but things don't go the way you want them to go. People hurt or frustrate you. You find yourself in circumstances and situations that completely overwhelm you, drive you crazy. And yet, day after day, hour after hour, the new commandment of Jesus to love one another is before you. To give something of yourself in order to make someone else's life better. To gladly do that good but difficult thing you know God wants and asks you to do. It's hardly an easy thing to willingly take on the struggles and inconveniences of others that shouldn't even be ours to take on in the first place. But we do it because we can. Because it is what love does. It's what glorifies God. The psalmist writes, "O Lord, I love the house in which you dwell and the place where your glory abides." If God is to dwell in your house, and if you want to make sure God's glory abides in your house, then do what gives God glory. Follow the example of God's own Son. Accept and welcome the little crosses in life because Jesus accepted the big cross for you. The implications of living life in this way are enormous. It might mean seeking a healed relationship with someone who has hurt you. It might mean showing compassion and kindness towards someone who just offended you. It might mean sincerely praying for that person you can hardly stand, or treating your coworker or boss with kindness even if he or she doesn't deserve it. It might mean showing a little goodness toward your grouchy neighbor or that family member who just never seems to get it right. Maybe it means treating with patience and respect someone who radically disagrees with you, who would eagerly try to humiliate and shred you in a bitter argument, if given half a chance. Living by this new commandment radically changes the way we live. Love one another as I have loved you, Jesus said. It's not your job to judge or condemn, but rather to love. Or as the Old Testament prophet Micah put it, to act fairly, to embrace kindness, and to walk humbly with God. To put it another way, to Praokasaob, and now I'll tell you what that means. Practice random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty. Each and every day, wherever you go, with whomever you encounter along the way. A woman took her grandson to the zoo. He wanted so badly to have his face painted by the artist who was drawing pictures of animals on the cheeks of all the children. But the boy's face was so packed with freckles that when he got to the front of the line, the artist said, "You've got so many freckles, there's no place to paint." The little boy was devastated and humiliated. He put his head down, walked away, and began to cry. In a way that only a loving grandmother could, she knelt down next to him. She traced her fingers across his cheeks and said, "I love your freckles. In fact, when I was your age, I wanted freckles. Freckles are so beautiful." "You really think so, Grandma?" the boy said, his spirits lifted. "You think my freckles are beautiful?" "Of course they are," the grandmother said. "In fact, I dare you to try to name even one thing that's more beautiful than freckles. I'll bet you can't do it. Go ahead, try." The little boy thought for a moment, then ran his fingers over his grandmother's cheeks. "Wrinkles," he said. That's how God asks us to treat one another. To look at the wrinkles, the freckles, the warts, and the flaws of another person, and see that person's beauty as God sees that person's beauty. This is what grace is. This is the beginning of loving as Jesus said to love. This is what gives God glory. Praokasaob, the new commandment of Jesus in a nutshell. Practice random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty. I invite you to try it this week, especially in the lives of those most difficult for you to love. See if it doesn't make a huge difference for you as much as for anyone else.